reminisce some of my feelings and some of my memories of the Bighorn Cemetery. I'm going to take a little different tact and try to put a little humor on the history. My first memory of being in the Bighorn Cemetery when I was a preschool ager, maybe this tall. It was a rainy spring day, about this time of year as I remember. I don't know who the service was for. The service had been in one of the churches here in Bighorn. I was so young, I don't remember which one. But my father was a pallbearer. It had been raining. Frost was out of the ground. The grass was just getting started. And the road in its present location between here and the cemetery was so muddy that nobody attempted to take a car. The hearse was horse-drawn, and they went through the Skinner place below the east side ditch and attempted to cross the east side ditch at a ford just west of where Roy and Carol Van Dievener now live. And the hearse got stuck in the east side ditch and pulled whatever connection there was. I don't know whether a hearse had a coupling pole or not. But the pallbearers had to take the coffin out of this horse-drawn horse and carry it that full quarter of a mile from there to the Bighorn Cemetery. And any of you that have ever walked on that ground know that it was wet. You don't make tracks. You take your tracks with you. Your feet get about that long and about that wide. And those men carried that. It was a drizzling rain. That's my first memory of the Bighorn Cemetery. A lot of things I have in memory that some of you may not know. One of them was, there was a time that there was a very deep controversy in the community about the owners of the land that my family now owns, where our feedlot has been, put an irrigation ditch right straight through the Bighorn Cemetery. The community was so divided that the only way that they would allow this irrigation ditch to go through the cemetery on the upper street was that the ditch was encased in a redwood box culvert, handmade. And that ditch did function for a while, and of course now it's completely obliterated, and I don't know whether anybody in this room was ever cognizant of that particular feature of agricultural irrigation in that area or not. But at the time that my late brother Orr and I bought that ranch over there in 1939, we thought that we might reestablish that water right, and we surveyed the ditch and gave up that it was so slow that it would be detrimental, wouldn't be a good means of conveyance, so we took a voluntary abandonment on the water right and put in the pump stations, which some of you may know that we've operated since the 1950s. Another memory I have of the Bighorn Cemetery was in midsummer of 1936, the last severe year of the drought here, but a great year for grasshoppers. My Uncle Paul Willits, the man who my son Paul Garber is named after, passed away. And there was nobody in the community at that time responsible for opening or closing graves, so my brother Orr and I went over there very early in the morning and started to dig Uncle Paul's grave, and it got hot, and we took off our shirts, threw them out of the grave on the adjoining stones, and the day got warmer and we took off our t-shirts and threw them out, and we finished the grave and climbed out, and lo and behold, those thin t-shirts had been soaked with sweat, and there was nothing left except just the bands around here and around the waist. All the fine mesh grasshoppers had eaten. I don't know whether any of you ever stacked hay with pitchforks during the drought years, but the grasshoppers were so severe for several years during the 1930s that if you had any hay to stack, and when you stopped for lunch, you had to push your pitchfork into the loose haystack where you come back after lunch, and the fork handle would be so rough where the grasshoppers had chewed on it for some reason that it'd just eat up your hands. And of course in the 1930s, you didn't buy very many pairs of gloves because a cow and a calf was worth 15 bucks. Ever since Orr and I opened that grave for Uncle Paul, the Vic Garber family has been responsible in some way for opening and closing every grave over there since. I guess you'd have to say we're either quite foolish or quite dependable. Over those years, we didn't do the work ourselves very often because we were always very busy. We always had lots of other things going, and I usually allocated the work to people that were working for us, but we were responsible for it. And I could go on several funny incidents, but this isn't the time or place to talk about those kind of things. I want to thank many, many people who have lived and been an integral part of this community for their public spirit and their dedication to the preservation and so on of the Bighorn Cemetery. I can't name all of them, but all my life there's been a group of men motivated by their wives that have donated many, many hours of work and quite a bit of personal funds to do and have the cemetery the way it is. The man that I give the most credit to as an individual was our beloved former postmaster, Jim Barry. He took a real interest, and he was the motivating person that the work has now been finished by other people in replatting, not in replatting, but in remarking the alleys and streets over there, and in getting the unmarked graves marked and finding out those unmarked graves and getting the names of those that could be found. Wendell Loomis was another one. John Zulig has worked hard at it, and many other people that I don't recall right now. But it's been a labor of community service, just like everything else in this community. And it's the same people, generation, the same families, the descendants, generation after generation, that have brought it on. And that's what makes living in an area like this so very worthwhile. Thank you.
Cemetery was established back in 1885, and Victor was talking about the Garber family. Well, I'm going to talk about the Willits family. That's also his family. J.O. Willits was the first chairman of our cemetery, and for those of you who might not know the relationship, Richard Garber here would be the great-grandson of J.O. Willits. And Richard serves on our board today, and J.O. Willits was our chairman when it opened and started. So the Garber Willits family have been involved since 1885. This is the first meeting that they had. For those of you who aren't familiar with the town of Bighorn, the schoolhouse was their meeting house, and it was one block just west of us. It's that open field that's over there around the corner where you come down. So the school was where they met, and this first meeting was, I believe, February 3rd. And J.O. Willits was chosen as chairman and Henry Coffeen as the secretary. Several other famous Bighorn names are there. They decided they would wait and have another meeting to pull more folks in to talk about the work that needed to be done. They had decided that where they wanted the cemetery was where it is today. It's to the east of Bighorn. And when they had their next meeting, it was February 5th. Now we're talking February 1885. These people had horses and buggies, right? Mm-hmm. And they would come into Bighorn to have this meeting. And this special meeting had several attendees. And they would pay for a cemetery plot, which was about 8 spaces. They could pay cash, or work, or supplies. Now, luckily they had met that week, and on February 8th was their first person who died and was interred. Her name was Louise Farwell, and so they met, the first meeting was on the 3rd, she died on the 8th. And this is our first burial in the cemetery. The headstone is absolutely gorgeous. It's very tall, and I have a better photo in this next slide, and that's the original obituary. I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from her obituary. The death of an estimable lady. Early Sunday morning last, the sufferings of Mrs. Charles Farwell were ended, and she passed into the dread and unknown beyond. The deceased was almost 30 years of age, and had been wed but a few weeks, when she was stricken by the reaper. And they then met again. This would have been, I think, on the 10th. And what they did at this meeting was decide that they would purchase the land from Mr. Lewis, and that Henry Coffeen would draw out a map and a plat for the cemetery. And one day I was cleaning the museum and I found it. And it was wrapped around a broomstick handle. And it's on silk. This is the original plat. We still use the numbering system and everything today. And so Henry Coffeen is the one who put this together. This is now stored at the Wyoming room. We're trying not to leave anything out here that's burnable. Now, Louisa Farwell was married to Charles Farwell, and he worked at the Bighorn Merc, and you've probably seen this photo before. And now I have somebody else I can introduce, Tom Parker. Tom, can you wave to everybody if they don't know you? Bighorn Merc is still in his family. He is a member of the Skinner family. So Charles Farwell was this gentleman here with the hat. And just to explain this photo, we think this could have been the very first issue of the Bighorn Sentinel that's being delivered. And Charles here is reading the newspaper. And we found another photograph of him in the Jackson Family Information of the University of Wyoming. And he was the owner of the stage station here in Bighorn. And sadly enough, he... Okay.
There you go.
Did it show up, or did I go past? Okay.
There, okay.
Okay, this is
J.O.
J.O. Willits' signature, and this was taken, these are the minutes to establish the new treasurer, which was Charles Skinner, his great-grandfather?
Great,
Just your great? One great.
one great.
His great-grandfather became then the secretary of the cemetery because Charles Farwell had passed. So it's a very sad situation for that young couple. Now we're back to the Benton family and Elsa Spear, Virginia Bell Benton, which would be Virginia Bell Benton is your great grandmother. And so Virginia Bell would write all the births, the deaths, because her husband was a reverend, he was also a doctor. And so this sort of just has a synopsis of Bighorn history all in this little journal that she kept. I have here Mr. Charles Rose's funeral, and the reason that I circled this is because Reverend Benton made the headstone. He carved it for Charles Rose, and I'm sorry I don't have a photograph of it. It's basically completely washed away. He was a Civil War veteran, and we really should try and find a military stone for him. He was one of our first burials as well in Bighorn. It was a very sad story. There's a notebook that I got from his family on his history, and it's fascinating what happened to the Rose family. So we have early books, records. They are kept in the Garber agribusiness safe, and Victor allowed me to take them home and digitize them, and then I gave them back to Victor. And so I have all of these things scanned. I'm just showing you some of our early records. They were quite detailed. And we used these in order to build the maps that we still use today. So this was when they decided to actually go after and purchase the land. They bought it for $3 an acre, 5 acres, so they paid $15 to Mr. Lewis. And this is the deed from Mr. Lewis. We also have some other notes back and forth, receipts, how some people were paid, what they were donating. It took about a full day for someone to go from Bighorn to go over there to show a space to sell it, and to be sure that everything was correct in terms of the ownership. And then opening the graves, of course, took a shovel, so it was quite a long process to bury anyone. So that's what some of these are. Now this is an interesting fellow. This is Jerome Brown. He was first here, he had a dairy in Bighorn. He decided he would move closer to Fort McKinney, and he could then establish his dairy over there. He provided all the cheese in these great big, barrel of cheese for the fort, though they ended up calling him Cheese Brown. He became a county commissioner, and during the Johnson County Cattle War, he was on the assassination list, and so was his 13-year-old daughter. That's a whole other story. Once they got through safely of the Johnson County Cattle War, they came back to Bighorn. So this couple, they're married, what is this, their 50th wedding anniversary. He died about a year after this photo.
And this is when Sheridan was still in Johnson County?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see, the Johnson County Cattle War, no, I'm sorry, Sheridan County split off in 1888.
Oh, okay, okay,
And the Johnson County Cattle War was 92.
okay.
Right. So this is not necessarily a death certificate, but we used to get a lot more information when people died. So these are called the burial permits. My copy is too little for me to read, so I need to read this slide for those who can't read. Jerome Brown, his is the second death permit on the left. He died of senility. Bessie Miller died from typhoid fever. Charlie Marquis died from tuberculosis. Fred Harper died from stomach cancer. Ellen Poisett from scarlet fever. Again, Fred Harper is related to Tom. Great uncle?
Step.
And we have several Harpers buried in the Bighorn Cemetery and Skinners as well. So the information that we used to get is a lot more complete than what we get now. There's sometimes not even a death notice, not even obituary. It's really sad when we've had that situation. Paul and John Zulig and I, we went over to the cemetery when they brought a body. We knew the woman, and Paul opened the grave. The funeral home buried her, and there was nobody there to give a service. And so we three stood around and we had a minute of silence for her. And you just sort of do things different once you're on the board and you realize that there are some really sad situations in family relations out there. And when I contacted the daughter, she absolutely would not give me even the death date. So it was very, very painful for me because I knew her really well. And so that was just one situation that we don't have a complete record of all of our burials because families just choose not to share that. This is a book that Grandma Garber put together. This would be Richard's grandmother, Vi Willits Garber. And she took over the record keeping for several years. And this is a handwritten notebook that she did. You can see that's a shoestring that kept it together. And this is, I think it's the alphabetical listing. She also lists all of the lots and blocks there. And so when you read this, you will see she gives a little bit of a history of where the people lived. Possibly she knew about the death and where the family might have moved to after the passing. That happened quite frequently. Then we have a whole other set of records that was done by Sally Springer. And she sat down with Grandma Garber and did even a more exhaustive record keeping of those people who have passed. And so this was Sally Springer and her book. Now, when my mom was not well, Sally asked me if I would take over for my mom. And so then I took Sally's books and incorporated this in terms of what I have at my house for records and record keeping. Most everything I have also is digitally and is at the Wyoming room. This will tell you a little bit of the history of some of our deaths. This happened early on. Jack Dow and Opie Hanna were on their way back from Buffalo, and this Indian man had died, and they found him along the road. So they wrapped him in a blanket and brought him over and buried him in Potter's Field. And so we are cautious about this burial because he had smallpox. I don't believe we're allowed to ever disturb that because the smallpox spores can still be active. I don't know that for a fact. I just know that in Potter's Field, we do not disturb that area. There's so many burials there that we don't know who's all there. So what we have is what we have in terms of record keeping. If you notice down at the bottom, they're talking about a pioneer girl. She was, I believe, blonde. She had long blonde hair, and it was assumed that she was on a wagon train, had died, and they buried her. And there was a grave that was open. They just put her in that grave. We don't know the name or anything about it. Okay, some more records. A few months ago, I told you about Sarah Hensinger's death when they were on a wagon ride coming down off of the mountains, the southern Moncrief Ridge up here. There's a little bit of an area where the road goes up. They were coming down that. It was very steep. She got thrown out of the wagon tipped. It was just a terrible accident, and she was instantly killed. I believe the wagon wheel rolled over her head. Mm-hmm. And so it took them a while to bring the body down. She is, I don't remember great-grandmother of Geraldine Johns Phillips, if you know Geraldine. She provided me with that information, so she's a descendant. These are some of the statistics that we have. I haven't updated this completely lately, but we have close to 750 burials. We have about 94 cremations. Our veterans count, I believe, is a little bit more than this now, because I just had to order flags for Memorial Day. We have close to 100 flags that we put out every Memorial Day. As you can see, we have a lot of Civil War veterans. I believe we have only one that has an official military headstone. This is the map that I put together. I've been doing the secretary job, I don't know, 20, 25 years. And so the map that we have is about every 4 years I will redo this and clean it up and bring the names of everybody. It's okay, we can just kind of show it. If you're interested, we have a copy of this over in the shelter that's by the gate, if you want to take a look at it. If you have any questions, I just brought this so that you can see what the information is on it. Anything that's green means that the space is available. Anything that is pink means we've got a lot of problems. And anything that's purple means that it's a pioneer family. If it's white, it means it's been purchased. And if you can see a little bit of black in there, that's the name of the person who's buried there, along with birth date and death date. And then these are my records that I keep together. This is a massive amount of work that Dec Hunter put together in her book, if you've ever seen it. I was able to just bring it into Excel, and I cleaned it up, I don't know, many, many years ago. But it's color-coded so that we know who the veterans are and who are also, you know, certain graves or cremations. The information is the owner, and then who has passed, birth date, and birth or death year is what we keep. And then some of our obituaries. This is a very young man. He was 16 years old, and he drowned in a pond. If we could look out this window, you could probably see the pond. It was over at Sackett's. And he was buried in Potter's Field. In Potter's Field, Sally did a lot of research at the courthouse. I don't know where else she got her information, but she is aware that there were several ladies of the night who were buried in Potter's Field. And of course, Bighorn had a very active district. And we had them, you know, across the street here, up the street, across the street. So there were several places that had ladies of the night, but they died an early death. So one of the early papers that I had shown you, I meant to point this out, a man by the name of J.N. Prairie was one of the organizers of the cemetery. He was murdered by his wife, 1896, with an axe over the head. And he had become the town drunk, and he had come down from where they lived. Exactly where they lived, we're not certain, but it was somewhere south of the polo field, possibly towards the Canyon Ranch. And that's where I still need to do some more research on that. But I will read a little bit about this situation in Sally Springer's Bighorn Tidbits. Behind this story is the account that by Mrs. Willis Garber told me 30 years ago. Please remember two things. First, tragedies that happened in this area were of a different time and circumstances. And second, we weren't put on the earth to judge. So we should have a bit of compassion and understanding for this family. The Perry family, according to Mrs. Garber, lived up on the Canyon Ranch Road, somewhere close to where the big red barn now stands. Mr. Perry drank terribly, to the point of taking monies he could find from the family, selling whatever he could. Perhaps the kindest thing said about him was that he was a town drunk. Now we would realize he was an alcoholic and need treatment. Mrs. Perry was the backbone of the family doing all of the work. This spring there was something extremely important coming up, and she was saving money for the little girl, maybe fabric or ribbon or a new dress. Mrs. Perry had the savings in a sugar bowl for a long time, and she had it kept hidden. So Mr. Perry had come home that night from downtown, and the family had gone to bed. Mrs. Perry heard her husband come in sometime after midnight. Not hearing anything unusual and thinking he would stumble into bed, she evidently just went back to sleep. In half sleep, she heard Mr. Perry leave the cabin again. Towards dawn, she heard him return. When she got up to start the morning fire, the first thing she noticed in the kitchen was the sugar bowl on the counter being empty, of course. Somehow Mr. Perry found the pennies she was saving for Maggie's special occasion. We can only imagine the thoughts of anger and heartbreak racing through her mind. Through tears, she was agonizing over how to tell Maggie the money was gone. She went out to split kindling for the stove, and without knowing, she evidently decided to split Mr. Perry. Mrs. Garber remembered a neighbor riding hard, asking her father, Mr. Willits, to bring his wagon, and told what had happened. She remembered watching her father later drive by with Mr. Perry's body and took him down to the doctor, which would be over by the brick church. And he, of course, died. And she was immediately arrested and taken to town. They had the trial, and they had a very short trial for her. She wasn't even allowed to leave her cell. They knew she was insane, and so she went down to Evanston, to the insane asylum, and not much is known of her since.
What happened to the child?
The children went back east to live with relatives,
Oh, okay.
and not to be known again. That's what it says.
I might add, that's many, many, many years for my Perry family moved to Wyoming.
Yes! No relation! No relation to us Perry family.
Come on, think about it.
And this is another murder that happened the same year. This is Gay Hudson Pillar. This happened down in Omaha, and he and this friend of his were working for Colonel Cody's Wild West show in Omaha. They had just finished their show. They had been paid, and this gentleman had $95 in his pocket, and his friend decided to steal it from him and murdered him for it. And that's that. So that happened, both of those murders happened in 1896. And then the Colemans, I had this in the newsletter not too long ago as well. This would be, I gotta stop and think the relationship. Dr. Upunchik, Kate Upunchik, they used to live here. This would be her grandfather, Clarence, who lived. There were 3 sons in the family. Earl and Fred both died within a week. Scarlet fever. Twice within a week was a loved one been taken from this home, and the eldest boy was too ill to permit the parents to even leave home to attend the funerals. So Kate writes back to me and says, Clarence is my grandfather. He used to tell how he had to lay in bed with his dead brother while his parents arranged things. We have so many children buried in Mount Hope, so many children. Accidents, lots of drownings, and of course scarlet fever, typhoid, all of the sicknesses. And then this was a young boy. He died, he was 17 years old, and he died of heart failure. We don't allow fences around this, the plots now, but these are still there. They're like, over 100 years old. And this was a really sad, tragic situation. 3 hunters went out up to Little Goose Canyon. One decided to go alone up towards like Teepee Creek. The other 2 went up over Little Goose. They got caught in a blizzard. They left their horses down in the canyon. They left their coats down on their horses. All they had with them were their rifles. And when they went up over the mountain ridge, they got caught in the blizzard. They decided instead of going down, they would go over to Dr. Reedon's cabin, which is, we've always called it Maggie's Ward, but I think it's also known as Aunt Jenny's Thimble on the ridge. The cabin would have been right back of there, and they missed the cabin and the yard with a fence by 4 feet. They could see the tracks of the people that went up to rescue them. And it was such a blizzard they couldn't see it. They ended up walking to Piney Creek, and they must have been delirious and very cold. They decided to walk down off the mountain in Piney Creek because the water was warmer
Oh, wow.
than being walking out in the snow. One of them slipped and fell into Piney Creek into a big pool. His body was finally eventually found. The other was, along the bank. And the other hunter, many of us knew this man. His name was Floyd Bard. And he survived. He's the one who came back. He built a big fire. He came down to get the rescue team. They sent out several people on Saturday, then they went back on Sunday, and they found the bodies late on Sunday and brought them out of the mountain. One of them is buried in Bighorn, the other is in Cody. And this is Lena Garber. I think, isn't this Grandma Garber's sister-in-law?
Yeah,
And she had cancer.
yeah.
And she was in Jackson Hole. And Grandma Garber decided to go get her to help take care of her. She was passing, so she was on her way, and Victor told me this story. Grandma Garber must have been in a Model A. From Bighorn to Hardin, there were 100 gates that she had to get out and over. And then she ended up in Jackson, got Lena and brought her back, and then Lena passed away here. Do you have anything else to add to that story?
No, I think you covered it.
Yeah, I thought I had a picture of Lena, but I don't think I do.
Yes.
This is so sad. Johnny Cover, many of you might know who Johnny Cover was. Very, very famous polo player. He raced polo ponies for the Gallatin Ranch. And in 1907, he lost his 3-year-old daughter on March 19 of appendicitis. The baby boy died on March 29th. His wife, Josie, died. She was 23 years old. She died on April 9th. Those two died of spinal meningitis. And he never remarried. And speaking of Floyd Bard, Floyd is in this photo. This is Floyd, the one that was the hunter that survived. And then this is Johnny Cooper. And this is Johnny Cooper. We were talking about the Loomises earlier. Victor talked about Wendell Loomis. The Loomis family was here early on. This would have been Wendell's uncle, and his name was Winfield. And most of you probably know Winfield Loomis of today. They are related. This is another sad story in the family. Helen gave birth to twins, but she died giving birth. And this would have been May 11th, 1911. Helen, one of the twins, died August 20th, and George, the other twin, died September 22nd.
Oh my gosh.
And he never remarried either. And in our records, I'm just showing you that sometimes you have to do a lot of really deep research to find out what the accurate date is. Everything that we have shows that she passed away 1933, but the headstone says 32. So you'd think if they spent money on a headstone, that date would be accurate. but sometimes it's not. We're still researching that, but you know, what's a year, but it could mean something to somebody someday. So this is Auntie Helen Dow, and this would have been Jack Dow's grandmother. She wasn't able to have children, but she adopted 2 children from Buffalo that belonged to her sister, the Lothians, and then she adopted a child from her brother had a child in Colorado, and that child would have been, let's think of her name, Benita Townsend. And so Benita would have been her niece on Helen's brother's side, and then the other children were from the Lothians. And so Jack Dow and Alan Dow were actually Lothians, and she would have been their aunt. And then we have this young man. He was kicked by a horse, and he died shortly after. He was 13 years old. And then this sign was designed by,
Chip Wood and Brownie Sensel.
yeah, Chip Wood. Chip Wood. He's related to you too, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chip designed it, and then Brownie Sensel made it. And Brownie Sensel's blacksmith shop is just 2 houses over from here.
Where did the name of the cemetery come from?
You know, I think I just recently found that out. There was a big association across the United States, and it was the Mount Hope Association. And it was for pioneer cemeteries. Back then, it was for cemeteries to help them to be established. And I guess I'm going to tell you now what I learned about how this cemetery was laid out and how most of your early Christian cemeteries are laid out. You have a headstone, right? Some of these places have a footstone. The headstone is always on the right. The footstone is always to the east. And why that is when the second coming of Christ and he comes over the horizon, the head wants to see what's coming over the horizon. When you're having a husband and wife, the man is always on the right, the woman's on the left, as you're at an altar at a wedding. That's how I remember it. So the man is always on the right, the woman's always on the left, headstone on the west, footstone on the east.
Cool.
So, Gina, I think that's where it came from.
I just wondered, because it is, I mean, for a cemetery, to have just the name Hope, you know.
Well, we were established in 1885. There's another Mount Hope Cemetery in Sheridan County. In Sheridan. They were established in 1892. It gets everybody confused in genealogy research. If you know somebody was buried in Mount Hope Cemetery, you have to ask them, was it Bighorn or Sheridan? So now we know that these Mount Hope cemeteries were throughout the United States and throughout the West. We don't know how many there were. That's another research project.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Judy, have you got pictures of the gates that Brownie and Chip Wood, of the gates underneath? Oh yeah, they're on there.
It's kind of here. Yeah, this here.
Yeah.
I don't have the gate, how it opens.
Yeah.
I don't have that.
Well, that was a design of artist Chip Wood. He designed and Brownie. And it's kind of a funny story because they both liked alcohol. And they got along pretty good until about noon. And then the gate came in until the next day, but it was quite a time.
Yeah. I'm trying to put together my story about Perv Longerie
Yeah.
and Brownie Sensel.
Yeah.
And Paul Garber's the one who's going to tell us about it. Okay, so on our board currently, we do have Richard Garber. He, I believe, either you're our president or vice president.
I don't know, I missed a meeting and I think I'm vice president.
Should've been there.
Mona is our treasurer. I'm the secretary, and then we have Paul Garber is either president or vice president. We have John Berry, who is on our board, and then we also have a new member is Dennis Rear. I guess I'm going to just take this time to tell you how our board really operates. If you were a Garber, or a Coates, or a Berry, or a Curry, which I am, you're just, born to be on this board. You are going to be a member. It's just in your genes. Of course, the Garbers have been involved since 1885. Jim Berry and Betty Berry decided to save the cemetery back in the 50s, so they had an organization put together because it was really becoming overgrown. And we didn't have any burials over there in the 30s or 40s, maybe once or twice. And so then the Loomises also were part of this process. My mom and dad was in Boy Scouts, and so the trees and the bushes were planted by my dad's Boy Scout troop, and how I know that is because of Darrell Daly. He was a Boy Scout and worked for my dad, and they planted all the trees. Mom and dad took care of the flags for all those years over Memorial Day. They mowed, they cleaned. The Berries helped lay it out, and then Jim Berry did keep track of the sales, and Betty was part of that process. Phyllis Garber also took care of the sales. My mom later was secretary treasurer. She took care of showing the spaces and selling. So we have all of those records throughout. And then when our moms weren't able to do that, then we just sort of took over. So these are the names of the people that have been really instrumental over the years of taking care of the cemetery. And I'm going to give special recognition to the Bighorn Lions Club. And Tom, thank you for you guys taking us on as your community project. They mow every May for Memorial Day, and they do the weed eating. And I tell you what, we couldn't do it without them. It's a thankless job because, like I said, it's 5 acres of mowing. And it's really a lot of work. And we also, actually, yes, Carolyn, Jean was on our board.
He was on the Bighorn Lions Club when he was president. Very active.
Yes. And he
The
was on our
Lions
board
Club was
too,
very
yeah.
active with that, yeah.
Yeah, and he helped so much with our mowing. And we just couldn't do it without the Lions Club now. Because it's so expensive to find people to do it, and then, purchasing all of the equipment and all. So, thank you.
And Dennis is a member of the Lions Club as well.
Yeah, Dennis, he's been on our board and he's had some great ideas, and we're gonna hopefully have a new lean-to to put the big mowers in, because our little shed over there, the door's not wide enough. So we're gonna have that possibly this year to be.
I would like to just add that Gene Griffith, Carolyn's husband, was a wonderful man, and he's sadly missed.
And you did.
Yeah, a quiet mover. He was a quiet man, but he moved mountains. He was great. So anyway, that is about it in a nutshell. Thank you so much for coming. Any questions?
I have one. When you were showing us the map and color-coded green available, white, and you said pink was problems, what do you mean by problems?
Well, for instance, we know somebody's buried there, but we're not sure which space. We don't have accurate records. At one point, when I showed you the statistics, we had, say, 26 known burials, but unknown where they were actually buried. Okay, then we had 70-some that we knew their names and where they're buried, but there were no headstones. So about 100, we had to go out and figure new headstones for them. About 20 years ago, we did put little headstones out, but those are the ones that you get from the funeral homes with the little letters in there, and they freeze and they pop, and then they pop out, or the lawnmower hits them. So we have a huge project to do those headstones eventually over there. And I don't know, sometimes Paul just finds somebody when he's burying somebody else. So we have problems. So we have to, put the dirt back and find another place so we don't disturb somebody. I mean, it happens, I don't know, maybe once every 5 years that happens.
Nobody else.
Thank you, Judy. It was really interesting.